Alright, listen up. Here's the thing nobody in this whole rap circus wants to admit out loud tonight. The part that should have Drake sweating in his sleep is not Kendrick Lamar sitting in the shadows hearing that new record called No Breaks. It is the split second the internet realized Drake barely showed up on the song at all. And by the time Wack 100 started running his mouth about a Compton video, this whole rollout stopped looking like a victory lap and started looking like two grown men trying to warm their hands over a fire Kendrick Lamar built and walked away from. That is the first thing everybody keeps getting wrong here. Half the people clicking on this story think Kendrick Lamar just got put on the clock. I am telling you right now, the opposite happened. The game may have just put his own credibility on the clock. Drake may have put his own aura on the clock. And the whole media hype squad orbiting these two may have just exposed the exact machine they use to inflate soft moments in a fake earthquakes. Because when a song is supposed to feel like a loaded warning shot, but the loudest questions online are why did Drake only give you a two-word cameo? Why does the visual look like GNX bait warmed over? And why does the rumored shoot location matter more than the actual bars? Then we are not really talking about rap anymore. We are talking about performance. We are talking about branding. We are talking about panic dressed up as pressure. On the personal level, that stings. Culturally, it tells you who still believes geography can substitute for lyrics. And on the industry level, when we get around to why that missing verse matters more than the whole song combined, this entire thing flips into something the diehards are absolutely not going to like. Does that already sound as strange to you as it does to me? Drop your take below and hit that subscribe button. Let us get into this thing properly. On the surface, the plot is simple. The game drops a project. Fans start circling lines that feel pointed at Kendrick Lamar. Drake is stapled to the track No Breaks. And every corner of the internet wants to act like some enormous West Coast pressure campaign just got launched at the man from Compton. But the second you slow it down and actually look at the pieces on the table, the contradictions start piling up faster than the cosigns. On one hand, you have bars and visuals that people online are already reading as obvious little jabs, coded elbows. You know how I'm talking about, hints. On the other hand, you have the game himself saying he and the so-called boogeyman have no real issue. So which one is it? Is this smoke? Or is this another one of those flip-flop performances where a veteran wants the eyeballs of conflict without the full consequences of standing in it? And that right there is why this matters right now. We are not talking about some random week in the culture where two veterans are stirring a pot for content. This is happening at a moment when Kendrick Lamar's position only got bigger, not smaller. Kendrick Lamar became the man whose silence still moves entire timelines. Kendrick Lamar is the artist who does not need to run around reminding people he still matters, because the entire room tells on itself every single time his name gets mentioned. Meanwhile, Drake is still walking around under a microscope where every gesture, every feature, every cosign gets read through the aftermath of that battle everybody watched. And the game has a documented history of trying to attach himself to bigger moments by piggybacking his energy onto other people's storms. So when those two names show up together anywhere near a Kendrick Lamar adjacent controversy, fans are not paranoid for paying attention. The real question is whether they are paying attention to strength, or whether they are paying attention to something that looks a whole lot more like desperation. Then you add the Los Angeles piece. Then you add the Compton piece. And now the whole conversation swells past the song itself. Because Compton is not a random backdrop you can just rent out like a warehouse and expect people not to read the symbolism. A rumored music video shoot in Compton, especially with Drake's name in the mix, even lightly, becomes a statement whether the artists intended one or not. It becomes a conversation about who gets to plant a flag on whose block, who is standing with who, whether this is genuine cultural movement or just rollout theater wearing a bulletproof vest for the cameras. That is why a huge chunk of the fanbase is reacting to the setup rather than the actual song. And then Wack 100 walks in and tosses another grenade on the pile, reportedly saying that the game and Kendrick Lamar could be in the studio together in a matter of days. Now hear me out. That kind of claim always needs to be handled carefully until somebody confirms it. But even the rumor by itself tells you a story, because it tells you exactly what kind of attention economy this whole thing is living inside. Contradiction is the fuel. Confusion is the fuel. They are dissing, but maybe they are collabing. It is smoke, but maybe it is business. It is a shot, but maybe it is a joke. That is the exact cocktail that keeps people refreshing timelines all night. So the real question is not whether people are talking. Of course people are talking. The real question is whether this entire moment was designed to say something powerful or designed to keep Kendrick Lamar's shadow hanging over people who still need his name to make their own rollout feel oxygenated. Let us start with the piece of evidence nobody can slick their way around. Drake's presence on No Breaks became the whole headline. But the actual amount of Drake on that record is the thing that blew this whole rollout up for the wrong reasons. Fans expected a feature. Fans expected an actual verse. Fans expected at the very least enough participation to justify the way every gossip page was framing this like some kind of alignment. Instead, what a lot of listeners heard was basically a cameo so thin you could see the light through it. And that matters more than people want to say out loud. If this was supposed to be a genuine alliance, if this was supposed to be a serious statement, then why does the biggest attached artist sound like he did not even bother to fully unpack his suitcase before leaving the booth? Why are fans out here joking that Drake said less on this record than the artists people usually clown for having tiny guest spots? You cannot sell the world on the idea that the cavalry has arrived and then roll up with 2 words, a whisper, and a ghostly presence. That is not pressure. That is not pressure at all. That is branding. And the reaction to that first piece of evidence hit almost instantly, because fans know exactly what a real cosign sounds like. A real cosign sounds like investment. It sounds like energy. It sounds like bars. It sounds like an artist saying, I am inside this record with you until the end. What we got on No Breaks felt more like here, put my name on it, and see what you can do with the leftover heat. That is a brutal difference. And it tells you something immediately about the hierarchy inside that room. The game may be loyal, loud, and eager to broadcast where he stands. But what did he really receive in return? If a man is diving headfirst into narrative warfare on your behalf, and the best you can do is a 2-word rubber stamp, that is not brotherhood. That starts to look a whole lot like one-way usefulness dressed up in a chain. And be honest with yourself for a second. If Kendrick Lamar genuinely believed in a record, does he show up like that? Or does Kendrick Lamar actually finish the job? That contrast right there wounded this rollout deeper than any diss line could. Now let us step over to the second piece of visible evidence. The visual and lyrical bait aimed at Kendrick Lamar. People online instantly started matching up the cover energy and certain bars with Kendrick Lamar-related imagery, especially all the GNX chatter that has been ricocheting around the culture. Now to be fair, not every car reference is a diss. Not every West Coast visual is a coded message with a decoder ring hidden underneath. I want to give that counter-argument its full weight, because half the commentary channels skip the nuance and then complain later when nobody trusts their reads. But come on now. When you pair that specific type of imagery with bars fans are obviously going to link back to Kendrick Lamar, and then you sprinkle in lines about the boogeyman, while still claiming there is no real issue between you and the man, you are not accidentally creating a narrative. You are curating one with tweezers. You are setting up a plausible deniability rollout where the fans do all the accusing for you while you get to lean back and pretend you are shocked anybody read it that way. That is old school bait. That is manufactured ambiguity with a bow on it. If there is truly no issue, then why does everybody keep knocking on the same door? And the third piece of surface-level evidence is the Compton angle. Publicly, the idea of a No Breaks music video being shot inside Compton started traveling almost faster than the song did. That right there should tell you everything you need to know. The location became the story, not the songwriting, not some earth-shaking verse. The location. And when the setting is outgrowing the music, that means the music is not carrying enough weight on its own 2 feet. The rumor works because Compton is not a neutral space in this conversation. It immediately triggers memory. It triggers politics. It triggers pride. It triggers tension. It asks the audience to picture who is welcome inside those blocks, who is protected, who is testing a boundary, and whether the whole visual is meant to be symbolic or straight-up confrontational. If a rollout needs to borrow geography just to raise the stakes, then what exactly does that say about the actual song? And keep this in mind, because it matters. The public media reaction was its own 3-ring circus. A lot of streamers and reaction voices were trying their absolute hardest to package this like some monumental West Coast statement. But even that campaign looked shaky in real time. Fans were picking up on the forced excitement. That overperformed "this is crazy" energy that sounds less like genuine shock and more like somebody trying to coach the audience on how big a moment is supposed to feel. You know the exact vibe I am describing. A record comes on. The face is screaming classic, but the body is screaming, I am selling this way harder than I am actually feeling it. That disconnect matters because media amplifiers are usually the first people to snitch on a weak rollout. If the reaction feels engineered, fans notice. And the comments absolutely noticed. Half the top comments were not even debating whether Kendrick Lamar should respond. They were debating why the song sounded mailed in from a hotel lobby. Why the feature felt lazy. Why this whole thing sounded like it was being inflated by pure agenda instead of genuine art. That is why the surface layer alone is already ugly for the people pushing this as a catastrophic strike on Kendrick Lamar. The record did not land as cleanly as the hype suggested. The imagery felt a little too intentional to be an accident. The Compton angle threatened to swallow the music entirely, and the loudest boosters standing around it made the whole moment look even more fabricated. If this is the visible level, meaning just the stuff any casual fan can hear, see, and compare, then imagine what happens when you start looking at how the culture itself absorbed it. Because that is where the story gets a lot worse for the rollout princes. And oh, I have plenty more to show you, because the diehards are truly not going to enjoy this next part. The surface evidence was already enough to make this rollout wobble on its heels. But once you get into the cultural reaction, once you look at how people close to the ecosystem and the actual fan communities process the whole rollout, the picture turns ugly at a much faster speed. And I am not even talking about the loudest troll pages yet. I am talking about the fact that the entire conversation kept sliding away from Kendrick Lamar is in trouble and steadily sliding toward why does this whole thing look so forced. Now hear me out, because when we get to the insider chatter, the TD adjacent reactions, and that studio rumor, that is the exact instant this whole thing stops looking like offense and starts looking like fishing with a broken rod. The first cultural tell was that people plugged into the wider West Coast conversation did not react like they had just witnessed some untouchable strike. Based on what was circulating everywhere, the vibe was more confusion, more jokes, more side eyes than anything close to fear. That matters in rap. The first public temperature check matters more than any billboard. If the culture smells actual danger, the culture moves one way. If the culture smells performance, it moves in the opposite direction entirely. And a whole lot of people smell performance. Some fans were clowning the notion that this song could shake Kendrick Lamar at all. Others were fixated on how contradictory the game looked, throwing little references here, then backing off there, then stepping forward again through symbolism and friend-of-a-friend energy. The flip-flop energy was not being read as fearless truth-telling. It was being read as somebody circling a bigger orbit, trying to reach out and touch the heat without getting his fingers burned. The next cultural layer to notice was the reaction from people fans mentally associate with the Kendrick Lamar side of the world. And listen, because I am not doing live source verification in this breakdown, I want to frame this carefully. What circulated all over the discourse was not panic. It was dismissal. It was eye-roll energy. It was the world has gone crazy energy, not the we need to emergency respond energy. That distinction is enormous. Because when a real threat lands, it creates real tension on the target's side. When a weak provocation lands, it creates memes and shrugs. One of those looks like impact. The other one looks like content. And on top of all that, the fans kept dragging the same single issue back into the middle of the room. The Drake missing investment issue. That point simply would not die, because it cuts straight through every layer of smoke. People can argue all day and all night about whether a line was truly a diss, whether a cover was truly a subliminal, whether picking a specific city was disrespectful or just strategic. But when the artist who was supposed to supercharge the whole record barely shows up, the audience instantly starts asking the single most disrespectful question you can ask any rollout. If even Drake did not fully commit to this record, then why on earth should I? That question is devastating. That is not just a critique of the song. That is a critique of the confidence behind the song. And once fans start branding a rollout as half-hearted, it is almost impossible to bully that story back into legitimacy. Now let us give the strongest counter-argument, it's fair shot. Some people are going to throw this at you like it solves the whole thing. They will say it is just a West Coast record. It is not that deep. Maybe the Drake feature was intentionally minimal. Maybe the Compton talk is just aesthetic. Maybe the game is just being the game. Fine. I hear that. And if this were a single isolated detail, I might even buy some of it. But it is never just one detail, is it? It is the minimal feature plus the baited imagery plus the boogeyman contradiction plus the Compton rumor plus the constant push telling the audience to read the whole thing as a power move. Patterns beat excuses every single time. And once a rollout keeps leaning on ambiguity, proximity, and symbolism instead of straightforward conviction, the excuse gets weaker, not stronger. Then Wack 100 reportedly steps in and floats out that the game and Kendrick Lamar could be locked inside a studio together soon. And that is where the culture layer becomes almost surreal. Because whether that specific claim was serious, strategic, or pure controlled chaos, it did precisely what it was engineered to do. It kept the story unstable. Sit with that for a second. In one breath, you have a record that fans are reading as pressure. In the very next breath, you have a rumor that suggests possible collaboration, or at least proximity, between the game and Kendrick Lamar. That is not clarity. That is attention engineering. That is the art of keeping every side of the audience emotionally locked in by refusing to let the narrative ever settle down and go to sleep. Fans who want beef stay glued. Fans who want peace stay glued. Fans who want pure mess absolutely stay glued. It is brilliant chaos if your goal is conversation. It is a terrible look if your goal is to appear rock solid. So by the time we exit the cultural layer, the entire problem becomes obvious to anyone with a clear head. The people trying to sell this as a commanding statement on Kendrick Lamar are fighting against the actual emotional reading of the culture. The culture did not respond like Kendrick Lamar had been cornered in an alley. The culture responded like a bunch of grown men had figured out that Kendrick Lamar's name is still the fastest way to make the entire room look up. And that is the hard gear shift right there. Because once you actually see that, you have to stop treating this like a normal rap moment. Now we have to talk business. Now we have to talk media incentives. Now we have to talk about why a record can be underwhelming musically and still be massively useful to the exact people pushing it. Stop for a second. Forget who won the comment section. Forget which fan base is screaming the loudest right now. This is a business conversation. The first systemic angle here is something I call borrowed stakes economics. When the music itself is not strong enough to dominate the room, the rollout has to import its stakes from somewhere outside the song. That somewhere else can be another artist, another city, an old grudge, a coded visual, a rumored location, a messy live stream, a fake countdown to a confrontation that may never actually happen. In this specific case, look at the asset mix on the table. You have Drake's name value. You have Kendrick Lamar's gravity as the implied target. You have Compton as a symbolic location with instant emotional charge baked in. You have the game's long history of being willing to stir conflict for headlines. And you have just enough ambiguity to let every blog, every reaction channel, and every fan page paint their own version of the story on top of the rollout. That is not an accident. That is packaging. Why is that so powerful? Because in the modern attention economy, certainty is significantly less profitable than tension. A direct statement ends the argument way too quickly. A layered maybe keeps fans refreshing timelines all night long. Was that a diss aimed at Kendrick Lamar? Will the video actually happen inside Compton? Will Drake really show up for the shoot? Was the feature always this short? Is Kendrick Lamar going to respond publicly? Every one of those questions is a monetizable unit. Every reaction thumbnail gets built on it. Every reaction stream survives off it. Every fan war lives inside it. And the most cynical part of all is that the song does not even need to be elite. The song just needs to be provocative enough to trigger speculation. That is exactly why weak songs can generate massive discourse. The song is not the product. The conversation surrounding the song is the actual product. The second systemic angle to lock in is proxy warfare. And this is where Drake's tiny involvement becomes extremely important. A full-length, high-energy Drake verse aimed anywhere near Kendrick Lamar would have created enormous upside, obviously. But that same verse would also have created massive liability. It would have demanded a much firmer public reading. It would have committed Drake to something. It would have thrown his reputation directly back inside a new round of lyrical scrutiny. A minimal cameo, on the other hand, is quietly genius. If your entire goal is low-risk relevance, you still walk away with the headline. You still walk away with the fanbase reaction. You still walk away with the opposition getting activated. You still walk away with your allies and media surrogates screaming that something enormous just occurred. But if the record falls flat, if the room laughs, if Kendrick Lamar never responds, you can always retreat and act like it was never that serious anyway. That is not battle energy. That is risk-managed branding. And the game's role inside that structure is equally obvious. He becomes the delivery vehicle. He is the one absorbing more of the cultural backlash, because he is the face on the record, the one leaning into the local symbolism, the one taking the visible stance. Drake gets to extract name value without equal exposure. That is why the missing verse matters so much. It suggests an imbalance in confidence and leverage between the two attached artists. One man needed a headline. The other man needed a Drake association. So what did they manufacture together? A moment that lands bigger in the discourse than it lands in the headphones. If you have followed this kind of analysis before, you have heard me say it 100 times. When the rollout mechanics are doing more work than the bars themselves, the bars are not the ones winning the battle. Then you add the media machine on top of everything. This is exactly where the court streamer energy enters the story. Streamers, gossip pages, commentary channels, and fan-run accounts are all rewarded for escalation, not moderation. Nobody gets algorithm love for saying, yeah, this record is kind of undercooked. Let us revisit it next week. They all get rewarded for urgency, for crisis, for pretending every little jab is a full seismic event. So if a controversial West Coast record with Drake's name pinned to it drops during a hot post-battle era, the incentive is to inflate the whole thing immediately. Some voices will genuinely believe the hype they are selling. Others will knowingly perform the hype because they understand the metrics behind the metrics. Either way, the effect on the audience is the same. The public gets pushed toward a stronger emotional interpretation than the actual art can support on its own two legs. That is how manufactured narratives become sticky, and that is also exactly why the Compton video rumor is such an efficient promotional device. A music video is no longer just a visual. It is a second content wave. It is another cycle of speculation, another set of reaction clips, another chance for people to argue about who is being provocative, who is being strategic, who is being reckless, who is being protected, and who is quietly being propped up by the machine. If Drake actually shows up in that Compton visual, that becomes a story. If Drake does not show up, that becomes a story. If Kendrick Lamar ignores the whole visual, that becomes a story. If somebody inside Kendrick Lamar's orbit posts a single cryptic response, that becomes a story. This is exactly what I mean when I say the system rewards instability. The more unresolved variables floating around the rollout, the more everybody in the ecosystem eats. So the deep analysis funnels into one deeply uncomfortable conclusion for the people trying to spin this as a win. No Breaks does not primarily function like a diss record. No Breaks functions like an attention device. It is an engineered object built to convert ambiguity into coverage. The song, the cameo, the visuals, the city talk, the live stream chatter, the rumored studio angle. All of it working together less like pure art and more like a coordinated attempt to keep Kendrick Lamar's gravity inside the room while minimizing the direct accountability of standing squarely in front of him. And the second you see that clearly, the entire moment stops looking dominant and starts looking dependent. Which drags us straight to the truth bomb. Because this is the part a lot of fans are absolutely going to hate. The most damaging truth is not that the game dissed Kendrick Lamar. It is not that Drake aligned himself with the game for a rollout. It is that this entire moment strongly suggests Kendrick Lamar has become so central to the rap economy that even the people trying to position themselves against Kendrick Lamar still have to build their own relevance through Kendrick Lamar's silhouette. That is the real reveal. That is the whole story compressed into a single sentence. Think about how brutal that actually is. If No Breaks were genuinely strong enough to stand up on its own two legs as a moment, the song would be the center. Instead, the center keeps sliding right back to Kendrick Lamar. The rumored tension is about Kendrick Lamar. The symbolism is about Kendrick Lamar. The possible Compton provocation is only meaningful because of Kendrick Lamar. The speculation around studio sessions is only meaningful because of Kendrick Lamar. Even the audience anger cycles and defense cycles are being organized around Kendrick Lamar. So who is really powering the entire moment? Not the people holding the microphone. The person being used as the gravitational field they are all orbiting. That is devastating. And Drake's missing verse makes that truth even harsher. Because what it suggests to me is that Drake wanted the temperature of the headline without the full cost of authorship. Drake wanted association without equal exposure. Allegedly. If the goal really was to make a forceful statement, then you would hear force on the record. You would hear commitment. You would hear a feature that sounds like a man who understands the exact stakes of his own move. Instead, what a lot of fans actually heard was a low-liability signature scribbled onto somebody else's confrontation. That is not command. That is caution wearing a costume. The game does not walk out of this cleanly either. Because if you keep circling Kendrick Lamar through bars, visuals, and rollout symbolism while still trying to preserve total deniability, you are telling the audience something whether you meant to or not. You are telling them the target is bigger than the attack. You are telling them the mention itself carries more value than the mission. You are telling them that attaching yourself to the boogeyman shadow is still one of the fastest ways in the culture to make people turn their heads and look at you. And that is exactly why the whole thing feels more desperate than dangerous. Not because the game cannot rap. He absolutely can. Not because Drake cannot move numbers. He absolutely can. But because this specific move feels engineered around proximity to power, not ownership of power. The cultural consequence is ugly too. It teaches fans to confuse symbolic trolling with substantive dominance. It teaches audiences that a city mention, a coded visual, or a strategically dropped rumor can substitute for actual artistic conviction. And the industry consequence is even worse, because it rewards more of this exact behavior in the future. More half-committed features. More maybe it is smoke, maybe it is not bait. More media inflation. More arguments about architecture instead of arguments about artistry. That is exactly why I keep repeating this is bigger than one record. It exposes a system where unresolved tension is often more profitable than clean resolution. So here is the compressed version for anybody who has been in and out of this video. No Breaks is not pressure on Kendrick Lamar. No Breaks is a stress signal being sent up by everybody around Kendrick Lamar. It is a public sign that Kendrick Lamar's name, Kendrick Lamar's city associations, And even Kendrick Lamar's silence still generate enough cultural voltage that other people can plug themselves into it and call the whole hookup a power move. And once you understand that, the entire rollout stops looking like a knockout attempt and starts looking like straight evidence of dependency. That is precisely why Kendrick Lamar is still the man standing tallest inside this whole mess without ever needing to shout about it. The hero in stories like this is never the loudest person in the room. The hero is the person whose position keeps being confirmed by everybody else's behavior. Kendrick Lamar is the one whose shadow organized the conversation. Kendrick Lamar is the one whose silence forced everybody else to overperform. Kendrick Lamar is the one who did not have to drop a panic response, did not have to hop on a live stream, did not have to explain himself, and still ended up in the exact center of the narrative anyway. That is power. Not internet power. Not temporary hype power. Real cultural gravity. Let me walk it back for you one time. The first big clue was Drake barely showing up on the record. That did not make Kendrick Lamar look vulnerable. It made the entire move against Kendrick Lamar look undercommitted. The second big clue was the Compton angle taking over the whole conversation. That did not make Kendrick Lamar look cornered. It made the rollout look like it needed borrowed symbolism just to feel dangerous on arrival. The third big clue was the fan and insider reaction landing closer to jokes, shrugs, and what are even doing energy than to fear. Once again, that does not weaken Kendrick Lamar. That strengthens the case that Kendrick Lamar is now the benchmark other people keep measuring themselves against whether they publicly admit it or not. And here is the single sentence that crystallizes the whole video for you. One side needed a feature, a city, and a rumor. The other side just needed silence. That is the scoreboard. Now the obvious question, does that mean Kendrick Lamar has to respond? My answer is no. Honestly, the strongest move Kendrick Lamar can make right now is exactly what he has already been doing. Letting the room continue to expose itself. Because every single time somebody tries to manufacture urgency around Kendrick Lamar's name, without fully stepping into the fire, they end up revealing the same thing all over again. They reveal who is driving the culture and who is chasing the culture. They reveal who can move an entire timeline just by existing and who needs an entire engineered content package just to compete for one news cycle. And to me, that is exactly why the right person is still winning here. Discipline outlasts desperation in the long run. Real gravity outlasts manufactured heat every single time. And this is only the beginning of the story, because the next phase of this whole rollout is going to tell us even more about the machine than the song ever did. If that No Breaks video actually gets made inside Compton, watch very closely what becomes the headline. Not the record itself, but who shows up, who stays away, and how hard the machine has to work to make the visual feel more explosive than the audio ever managed to be. If Drake appears fully inside those visuals, that means he is finally choosing deeper ownership. If Drake stays ghostly across the frame like he did across the record, that tells you the original reading was correct all along. If Kendrick Lamar says absolutely nothing and the discourse still spirals for another 2 weeks, then the truth we just walked through today gets confirmed in real time. So if you are tapped into this larger conversation, not just the surface fan wars, but the deeper way the rap media system keeps manufacturing importance around the exact same names and the exact same symbols, then stay locked in with me here. Because we are going to keep breaking these moments down the correct way. And if you thought this breakdown was revealing, the next one is going to hit even harder. Because I want to talk about the real reason Drake keeps reaching for borrowed cosigns, borrowed regions, and borrowed tension after every single high-profile rap loss he takes. The shock inside that next one is simple. Some of the biggest moves you are watching in modern rap are not real power plays at all. They are camouflage. The mystery is who actually benefits when the headlines are consistently louder than the bars. And the payoff is watching, in slow motion, exactly how the machine keeps protecting an image long after the room has already changed the locks on it. Drop your take below on which piece of this rollout felt the most manufactured to you. Was it Drake's 2-word appearance? Was it the Compton rumor? Or was it Wack 100 sliding that studio claim into the mix at the perfect moment? Hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and I will catch you on the very next breakdown, because this story is nowhere close to being finished. And let me push one more layer deeper before I let you go, because I think the audience deserves the full picture on the Kendrick Lamar situation, not the diet version everybody else keeps serving. Look at how the coverage cycle around Kendrick Lamar has changed over the last 12 months. Before that battle everybody remembers, Kendrick Lamar was already elite, but the average blog treated him like a critical darling first and a commercial monster second. After the dust settled, the framing quietly shifted. Kendrick Lamar became the reference point. Kendrick Lamar became the sentence finisher. Every time a rap conversation needed a benchmark, Kendrick Lamar's name showed up as the yardstick. And that is exactly the position the game and Drake are running into on this no-breaks rollout, whether they wanted to or not. You cannot rent that kind of positioning. You cannot buy it with a feature budget. You cannot fake it with a Compton backdrop. You have to earn it by walking through the exact fire everybody else is trying to circle from a safe distance. And Kendrick Lamar walked through that fire on camera, on record, in front of the entire industry. That is the invisible receipt in this whole story. Now think about how strange it is that a rollout aimed near Kendrick Lamar had to lean on so many outside props just to feel dangerous. Kendrick Lamar did not need a rumored studio session with a rival. Kendrick Lamar did not need a two-word cameo from a bigger name to validate his position. Kendrick Lamar did not need Wack 100 or any other loud voice to prop up the storyline. Kendrick Lamar walked into the room with bars, conviction, and a very clear point of view, and the culture handed him the crown on the spot. Compare that to a rollout that needs a city, a cameo, a rumor, and a small army of media surrogates just to convince you something big is happening. The difference is not talent. Both of these men can rap. The difference is stance. One artist stood on his own weight. The other rollout is quietly leaning on borrowed weight while pretending to stand tall. And once the audience clocks that stance imbalance, no amount of hype can bury it. That is why the comment sections have been so brutal this week. Fans are not stupid. Fans can smell the difference between a moment that stands on its own and a moment that needs a support system. And this no-break situation is textbook support system rollout. That is my read. Drop yours below and let me know if you see it any differently.